All right, I'm excited here. We have some great stuff to share with you. This video might wrap up this series. We'll see. All right, I have a number of things to talk about here regarding taking action. And sometimes people ask me about procrastination or motivation, and then relating that to breakthroughs and consolidating. Also, teachers about like success and so forth. They're all often talking about how you need to take action, right, in order to make money or in order to have success and so forth. But this is understandably something that we struggle with. All right, the first thing I have to say is kind of funny, but one thing that you're used to if you've been accidentally using the results and checklist and milestone traveling a distance model is that it often just doesn't work very well, right? You'll kind of get stuck or frustrated or feel overwhelmed or just not get the results that you want, or you'll get the result you thought you wanted, but it won't be as good as you thought once you get it, or else you'll get something and then it kind of implodes later. It all kind of crumbles. It can be as simple as something like you're just trying to fix something on your computer, like something's kind of going weird, or the other day I pre-ordered a game that was coming out called Dragon Age Inquisition, and when the time came for the game to launch, it didn't work. And so first I thought they hadn't released it, but then about half a day later, I went to sleep because it was kind of late. Half a day later, I realized maybe they did release it, maybe there's just kind of a glitch. And so I just went about using my usual breakthrough method, and I got it to work. And it involved a number of kind of obscure little steps and so forth that I had to figure out, and I had to reveal these hidden files. I had to find out on a different website than the main one that it was. Oh, I never even found out that it was released, and then I found some steps that it didn't even say applied to this particular problem. But like instead it was if you had like kind of download problems with it or something like that. But it had to do with clearing, deleting some hidden files to like clear your cache. It might have worked to restart my computer, by the way. That might have been a simpler solution. I didn't happen to try that. I would have tried that next. But and then to delete those folders, there were files were hidden and it wasn't. And then they said to use my control panel to unhide them. But then I'm on Windows 8, and getting to the control panel is different than I'm used to. And things that I used to do, like even on this computer, to like put my cursor on all the way to the right side of the screen would normally bring up a menu to get my control panel, but it just didn't seem to be happening for some reason. But the interesting thing is that these days when I go to solve something on a small scale or large scale, or of course business questions or issues come up consistently, and I don't really mean problems, but just, obviously you run a business, you're growing your business, or you need to figure new things out and create new stuff and so forth. Or even just I'll be discussing with Mike about what to write in the next broadcast email, and then separately what the subject headline is, right? Or we have the director's cut coming up, and there'll have to be emails regarding that and a sales letter, and then I'll be organizing what's in the members area and talking to people that are creating the content for that, and so on and so forth. Then I'll be integrating that in with Project Juggernaut next time it releases in early 2015. So there's a consistent stream of decisions and things that have to be done and figured out, ideally figured out well. And so the fun thing here is that this breakthrough method that I talked about, where I gave you those list of things where you poke around and you organize your knowledge, right, and so forth. And remember I talked to you about with the two different ways that, like, we're a good math student, someone who's kind of consistently does well in difficult math tests, and then a person who doesn't. And a person who doesn't, they're used to having difficulty with math problems, but a person who's has the proper methodology, the proper breakthrough methodology for figuring out difficult math problems on a test, they end up with a second benefit, which is once you're using a methodology that works, what happens is you keep experiencing that it does work. And so then your brain starts to just integrate the trend and the habit that you can solve these what used to be difficult problems. But this breakthrough method, it just works and works and works and works. It's pretty shocking. And at this point, people that are used to me, I see it in other people. They kind of take it for granted that I'm going to solve this thing or solve that thing or come up with a great answer for this or a great solution for that. And so it gets habitual. And the nice thing about that is, it's easy to imagine with the two types of people taking a math test. Someone who has a difficult time, it just gets harder to take action, right? Harder and harder, because when your results are, like when it's hard to get results, when the results you get are unpredictable and not that great, and then even if you get a result that you wanted and it seems pretty good, then it kind of erodes and goes away or blows up, like in a bad way, like implodes. Then you're accumulating this kind of habitual kind of gunk or bad experiences and feelings of difficulty, and your brain starts to expect it, and so it can get harder and harder to take action. And so I have a few different angles on this, on talking about taking action as it relates to breakthroughs. But one of the things to feel very encouraged about is that as you use this wonderful methodology of focusing on breakthroughs and doing it properly, rather than just trying to travel to a result and kind of get a little bit lost or stopped and have obstacles come up that weren't expected and all that. I can picture like a manager of like on a factory floor, like of an assembly line or something, and he gets an order from upper management that they need to have more output. And so I can imagine him giving like an inspirational speech to his people. Hey, we need to perform better. We need to output more widgets and so forth. And you can imagine, especially if they've heard that before, then people don't really react all that strongly to it. And then there won't be all that much more output just because an inspirational speech doesn't really do a whole lot, right? I mean, it might do something and it might improve output for a few hours or a few days in some way. But if instead the manager of the factory floor or the assembly line focused on what are the bottlenecks, right? And realizing that, oh, on step 4 of the assembly line, that's where things are getting stopped up. So I need to find ways to have either more people working there or have it be more efficient, or maybe there's just only so many widgets we can produce because we have a hard limit on how many widgets we can get through step 4 in a certain amount of time. But you can even imagine if you're that factory manager and you're getting an order for more output, if you have this breakthrough method in mind, you don't really feel frustrated or panicked. You just understand that if you want to have more output, then you need to have more breakthroughs, right? Or you need to break through at least one particular area, wherever the greatest bottleneck is. Then you need to expand that. And there's really nothing else going on. So there's no real cause for confusion. You know exactly what the answer is. And you might not know how to break that bottleneck, but you know that the answer is to follow the process of breakthroughs and apply it to that bottleneck. And if you're doing that, then you're working maximally efficiently, and there's really nothing else you can be doing. You're basically doing everything within your control at that point. And once you feel like you're doing everything that you can control, then you feel pretty calm. Okay, let's look at taking action from a different angle. Let's suppose that there is a clear road, and at the end of the road, you can clearly see something that you really, really want. All right, a pile of money or a pile of women, that your wonderful member of the opposite, of someone that you want to have a romantic relationship with, whatever, a terrific meal, whatever really moves you. Okay, a boat. Some people love boats. A vacation of your dreams, whatever it might be. So if at the end of a clear straight road there is that clear result, then you're not going to really have a problem with taking action, right? You'll probably just hop in your car and drive down it and get the result. So once we can see that scenario, then we can realize that you don't really have a problem with motivation or taking action inherently. What you do is have a problem potentially in getting the particular task at hand to look like that, to look like where there's a big clear result that you really want and it's connected up where you clearly see how you're going to get there, or at least you see like the certain path to get there. So now you can, again, I might be a little bit repeating myself, but any problem of motivation or taking action can boil down to, wait a second, it's not being represented to my brain like that clear road to a clear, happy result, all right, yet. And so you just need to get it there. I've utilized my awesome graphical skills to make a little extra slide for you guys. You could, if you want, now that we have that scenario as a backdrop of the result at the end of a nice clear road, then one thing you can do is kind of parse things or divide things out into motivation and resistance. And this may or may not help you, but what you want is to see that thing that you want, okay, so when I say your brain, and this is relative to you as an individual, your brain as an individual brain, there are certain things that kind of light your brain up that it already wants, that already motivate it, and mostly you want to go with that, all right, go with those things. You want to connect up whatever you're doing to something that your brain already knows that it wants. And intellectually speaking, if there's something that you want to take action on, then there has to be some reason in the first place anyway, right? We're not trying to figure out how to take action for something where there's no result that you want in the first place, right? If you're sitting there and thinking, oh darn it, I'm not taking action, I'm procrastinating, I'm not feeling motivated, then it already must be true that there's some result that you supposedly want. So you're not really going to have a problem where there isn't a result. However, you actually sort of could. And now how might that be? It's something I talked about in the last video. You might, remember, our brain tends to organize around standards and norms. And so you might just think that you need to do something in life just because other people in your peer group, and your peer group is sort of relative. It's your brain kind of decides who your peer group is for any particular activity. You might sort of have a religious peer group and like a career peer group that's separate. And you might have like a peer group for judging how great your husband or wife should be and that sort of thing. They might even be different groups. But anyhow, regarding any kind of other standards or norms you pick up from culture or from growing up as a child, then you might have these sort of expectations like, oh, I'm supposed to do this or I'm supposed to do that. And it's not connected to any result that you separately want. It's just connected to the standard or norm that you think you're supposed to live up to. So part of what might be happening is if you think you don't have motivation or if you think you're lazy, one thing I noticed at one point is I'm never really lazy about things that I want. I'm only supposedly lazy about stuff that other people want me to do, right? Where I really have no reason to want to do it other than they just kind of feel like I should. But that can kind of seep into our brain where we think that somehow they must be right. And even though there's not actually a reason why we would want to do that thing, they have that expectation, and they kind of, by having that expectation, it kind of affects our thinking and we want to live up to their standards and their norms. So the first thing that you want to do is to make sure that there's a result that you actually want, and then you're going to want to connect clearly the path to that result. And when you're connecting the path, you're eliminating confusion, blurriness, resistance. Now, there's a couple ways to look at this with this breakthrough model. One thing is you can notice that there's sort of two separate steps or things going on when you are trying to be motivated for something. One is, and this also applies if you like feel guilty about something or feel bad about something. One is that I'm going to call it intellectually just to kind of say it in a way that makes sense. There's the sort of intellectual sense of I should do this or I shouldn't. Like I should eat this piece of cake or I shouldn't, or I should feel bad if somebody's mean to me, or I should go and rank a website or perform some kind of task for work that you're trying to feel motivated to do. So you want to get that question of whether you should do it clear in terms of making sure that you really do want the supposed result that you're going for. And then, however, once or when it comes to like not eating cake, let's say, if you think that you don't want to eat cake or some other food that for reasons of energy or losing weight, then, or any other kind of health thing, then the first thing you want to figure out is that really correct? Is it really correct that eating this particular food, these days I can hardly think of a food that isn't supposed to be good and bad at the same time. Maybe like bean sprouts and kale. I can't think of anything bad I've heard about those two foods, but I'm sure someone can come up with something. And in terms of what's definitely bad, it's also hard to pin down. Maybe pure sugar or rat poison or something like that. So one thing you want to do is get a clear sense of that you're certainly not blurry about why that you want to do something or not. Because if you're uncertain about whether cake is really particularly bad for you, and I'm just using this as an example, I'm not making any health claims here. It's also I haven't really broken through on that yet in my life. Plenty of good information, but I'm certainly not qualified to get there. So if it stays blurry for you, if you're trying to take action or be motivated not to eat cake, then the problem is that if it's shaky or blurry or uncertain, then all you need is for the environment or your brain trying to get you to do the opposite for other reasons, to eat the cake. That just has to kind of yell louder, right? Or kind of be stronger or have more temptation. So there's this constant struggle, right? And the same type of thing can happen if you're trying to get your work done, to make money. If there's this constant struggle, then there's two things you need to do, right? You need to have a breakthrough and you need to integrate and consolidate, as always. So, and having this method is interesting because underlying your taking action is always going to be this meta strategy of whether you are having this mental model of breakthroughs and consolidating and integrating. So before that you get very clear on what this whole series is about, this breakthrough stacking, then you've always built your motivation and taking action and wonders about procrastination and so forth. You've always built it on a shaky foundation in the first place because there's this meta strategy having to do, again, with this idea of whether we're stacking like results and checklists or whether we're stacking breakthroughs. Once you get particularly clear about breakthroughs itself, once you have a particular clear breakthrough and then you consolidate and integrate regarding this methodology, this meta strategy, then you're going to know that you're taking good action. You still need to figure out what results you want to go for, but you can just calmly and powerfully do the breakthrough method or be in flow. And that's going to eliminate a major source of kind of wobble or blurriness or shaky foundation that you've previously taken for granted in your life. And that kind of ties back into the first thing I mentioned about taking action earlier in the video. So you need to have a breakthrough about should you do this work. If you're trying to get yourself to learn or do search engine optimization, or if you're trying to get yourself to start talking to potential clients in some way, then first you need to figure out, is that a step or a technique or a path that you definitely want to take? Is it going to get you where you want to go? And look at it clearly and look at the opposite and say, well, what if I don't talk to clients at all, potential clients at all in any way? Can I still get where I want to go without doing that? Now, the answer might be yes if you're going to do a different type of business model, but then pick a business model that you are going to go with, right? You can't just not want to get clients. You need to figure out something that you do want to go after. And once you pick something, what you can do is you compare it with other reasonable alternatives. Like if you say you want to make an affiliate site or make a product or maybe do some e-commerce, or maybe you do want to do client consulting, but you don't want to do it with search engine optimization specifically, or you don't want to do it with ranking pages, you want to do it with business listings on like Google Maps and the Google citations and so forth. Maybe you want to do web design. But whatever it is, look at the alternatives that you're aware of and decide which one most appeals to me. And at some point you can also say, what if I just never decide? Is that going to work? No, that'll definitely not get you where you want to go. So it makes sense at some point to just pick something and to use the breakthrough methodology with it. Because you can look at the opposite won't work. Like just kind of popping around from one thing to another and never really breaking through with anything, that's not going to help you. So what you want to do is break through with something, and any number of these things you could break through with without much problem. They're all very viable paths that you could do. And so break through with one, and then you'll have more of a sense. That'll be the best way to get to your answer anyway. Plus you'll have some kind of stable base of income, which will benefit you as well. So using reasoning like that, where you're either able to clearly see something you do want or start eliminating things that you don't. In either case, you're organizing your knowledge, right? You're poking around and you're organizing your knowledge. And then you've kind of fully dealt with okay, now I'm very clear that I should go for this particular result. Now you might say, David, I thought you don't go for results, you go for breakthroughs. Well, sure. I mean, the breakthrough is to be able to clear the way to get to a result. The point is you don't want to stack just getting results. You want to stack breakthroughs. But I don't mean that you have no idea of what results you want. And remember, the other problem with focusing on results and ignoring the idea of breakthroughs and resistance is you can achieve a result like you get clients or you're making $10,000 a month, but you've achieved it in a way where it's shaky and has resistance, or it's not properly consolidated. And so you don't, when you stack on top of it, things get worse and worse. However, saying, wait, I think I want the result of $10,000 a month, what you would do then is say, all right, well, and what's that going to do for me? Like, why is it that I want 10,000 specifically? Either you'll say 10,000 a month and you'll feel juiced. You'll feel like, yes, that is definitely what I want. That will be great. All right. And then that's fine. That means your brain's connected up with it. And now that probably means your brain is connected up with it. If 2 days later you think about making $10,000 a month and it doesn't juice you, then you need to investigate that more and kind of poke around and start and look around in your mind with and connecting it up to other things. Again, you want to use scenarios. Like you want to picture, all right, what am I going to use that $10,000 a month for? Is it going to go in my bank account? Is some of it going to go on certain things that I want to have in my life? And is other going to go towards saving and accumulating some savings? And you're starting to build out a scenario of what's going to actually happen with that money. And then keep going until you find something that particularly makes you feel motivated. And part of this with resistance and whether things stick, you can also just give it a couple days, right? And or just operate as if it did stick if you think it did, but then have the awareness that if you're noticing that it didn't really stick, where you're feeling not so motivated in a few days, then you just take a look. You say, do I still clearly want that result? And if the answer is no, then you need to find a result that you do particularly want. Or maybe you totally want that result, but you'd lost sight of it because you got caught up in a bunch of confusion on how to get there. So the second thing then, right, you're figuring out your motivation, and then the second thing will have to do with resistance, which can also come from just confusion or too many possibilities. So if we go back to that picture of there's a clear road and there's a clear result that you want, then if that result wasn't very interesting, then that would ruin the situation, right? So we want to make sure the result is clear and interesting and very desirable. But then let's suppose instead of a clear road, there was just this confusing branching road or network of tunnels, and you had no idea how to get through it. And suppose that in the past you dealt with this same type of situation, where there was a result you pretty much were sure you wanted, but there was this confusing mess of tunnels, either metaphorically or literally, and when you tried to go through it, you didn't get the result anyway. And so this time when you're sitting there at the beginning of this maze, then you don't feel motivated, right? And the reason though, it's not because the cheese is not exciting enough, right? The result, the thing that you want. The problem here is the resistance or the confusion. And so what do you do then? The next thing you need to do, first you break through and make sure with this, then you need to break through and consolidate with the path itself. So you need to figure out the right path. And maybe it turns out all you need to do, if we're back to like a road analogy or something, is just find a map or a GPS or something like that. And then it's all downhill from there. Then it's the same thing as if it was a straight road once you have a good GPS or a good map, right, or good directions. So, and that illustration or that scenario can show you more about how this breakthrough stacking can work, because it looked like you had this difficult journey in order to get a result, and because the journey looked difficult, you're having trouble taking action. Instead, you might find that you can boil the entire journey down to one breakthrough, and there might be multiple breakthroughs, but there maybe just one breakthrough of just going to MapQuest or something and writing down or printing out directions, or maybe you need to buy a GPS, and then separately you need to figure out how to work a GPS. But then you might realize, look, all I need to do is learn how to use a GPS, and then I'll be able to get to my destination. And so you've boiled the whole journey down to that breakthrough if you have to do the GPS. Now, otherwise, if you don't see things in terms of breakthroughs, you could say, my gosh, not only is there this confusing journey that I have, but on top of that, I have to go learn a GPS now. It's so much. Because without the awareness to look at breakthroughs for what they are, our brain can just extrapolate linearly and think that the breakthrough... See, our brain doesn't really think in terms of breakthroughs by default. And so it'll take a look at that situation where you get a GPS, and it'll just stack more difficulty in its own planning or projection onto the situation. It'll tend to think of a potential breakthrough situation that you need to achieve, or a threshold that you have to get over, as yet another difficulty. And so people want to ignore it. But a potential breakthrough situation is not yet another difficulty when you realize it's the only thing you might need to do. That GPS is not another issue on the way to your journey. It's the only difficulty. The rest is just a simple cruise down the clear path that's going to be laid out for you. Once you realize that, then you can just put all of your focus into that breakthrough. And then if you, on top of that, know the breakthrough methodology, poking around and organizing your knowledge and so forth, then, and in this case, the building the vehicle for a GPS would be kind of mentally, it's the same thing as any kind of learning, where you're kind of poking in with the details of GPS. You read a bit of the instructions, you poke around with the actual device, and until it just sort of organizes. There's kind of an organizing principle for you, like a trunk of a tree or something, where you kind of fundamentally understand it, and then you start to use it and make sure that you integrate that knowledge, that you can apply it and program the GPS properly for your destination, and check around and see what kind of buttons you might push that'll kind of screw the screen up and make it go away. And you don't want to panic while you're driving, so you kind of integrate and consolidate ahead of time. Make sure if it's the kind of, I guess we don't use these that much these days, but it's the kind that sticks on your windshield, make sure it's going to stay stuck and what to do if it's going to fall and that sort of thing. That's an example of consolidating. Okay, so to summarize, if you're having an issue with taking action or motivation, then first check on the result. Make sure it's a result that both you want. This breakthrough methodology kind of iterates. It's like kind of holographic, where with a hologram, every little piece is similar to the whole. But you want to make sure that the result is something that you want intellectually, and then you want to make sure the result is something that your kind of brain is connected to and really wants as well. It's if you're just affirming in a kind of non-integrated way, kind of an isolated way, oh yeah, I want that result, but if you don't feel it, then it's not integrated or consolidated in your brain. And so you need to flesh out that result and look around the result. Again, like I gave the example with the $10,000 a month, and you need to start saying, well, what does that mean? And sort of looking around in space and moving forward in time, backward in time, just sort of looking around in the scenario of having that $10,000 a month, and keep doing that until you find something that particularly connects up with your brain, until it particularly feels integrated for you, that you want that result. Second thing, once the result is both something that you intellectually want, and sometimes you might find that you just don't need the result in the first place, right? That can happen plenty, especially at first as you start to declutter your life from things that other people are just expecting of you, but there's no real reason for you to do it. So this is a good check in the first place, because some results you just can just discard. But you figure out if you want the result, and then make sure it's integrated. Whenever you're thinking, I'm going to get to another slide where I'm going to point out how to think. Kind of funny, but I'll give you just kind of a clear checklist or methodology. And I know I said the word checklist. Sometimes you can do step by step for some simple things. I've already broken through, so you can just have a checklist. All right, so first thing is getting your result clear. Next thing is understanding that in order to get the result, you need one or more breakthroughs, and then the rest you can just cruise, right? You just kind of get in flow. Don't let your brain accidentally confuse actions that you take while you're in flow, like driving. Notice that when we talked about in that illustration of the clear road to a result that you really want, notice that it probably didn't occur to you to ask how long the road was, like how far the drive was. Because if it's something you really want and it's a clear road, then it hardly matters how far you have to drive, right, within reason. Right? But even if it's 2,000 miles, right, you just drive it because you know you're going to get that awesome result at the end, and then you can easily drive. Right? It just takes you some time, but you can be in flow the whole time. And that's that. So don't confuse flow type of actions that occur after a breakthrough and consolidation or between breakthroughs. That is basically effortless. It basically doesn't count for anything. And make sure you see that. And so all you need to do is do some number of breakthroughs. And it doesn't matter how many, because you can get one of the fundamental tricks to life now is to be able to get in flow with having breakthroughs and with consolidating after a breakthrough. So do you see? So now you can pretty much live your life in flow, because as long as you can flow with having a breakthrough itself and consolidating afterwards, then you never really need to leave this happy flow. But you need to get that integrated in your mind. You need to understand it. You need to have a breakthrough of understanding, and then you need to integrate it by thinking about it. You integrate and consolidate by thinking and or doing from multiple angles and instances, right? It's not just repetition. It's more like multiple angles or multiple instances of actually doing something, but it's a little bit different each time you do it. Pure repetition is fairly inefficient, but approaching something from multiple angles, either in your mind, thinking of different situations where you would do something, or different things that can go wrong, or just looking at it from different angles, like physically. And also, as I said, just doing it in real life, doing the situation in different, or doing the technique or the process in different situations. That's how you integrate and consolidate, in case that isn't clear previously. So you're in amazing shape in life if you just learn how to get into flow with breakthroughs and with the breakthrough stacking itself. Okay, and since we are often going to be thinking in life, whether we like it or not, whether we want to or not, then you're going to need to integrate and consolidate this yourself mostly. But here is a potential breakthrough, or at least a little list that you can work on until it makes perfect sense to you. But normally when people think, I'll skip here to the middle of this slide, normally when people think, they're doing a process of essentially repetition and free association. So if someone says, I'm going to think about this, and let me point something else out, which might hit you fairly hard. People say to fairly small children, they say, think about that, right? Starting when kids are fairly young. And then throughout your life, people say, think about it. Or you'll say, okay, I'll think about that and get back to you. But think about, here I am saying think about it. Consider the idea of doing this with a young child. If you say, think about that, think it through, then what is the implication of that? What has to be true for them to follow your instructions? It has to be true that they already know how to think and they just need to go do it. So we are strongly kind of hypnotizing or programming into young children, and this happened to you, right, when you were a young child, that they already know how to think. So there must be something wrong with them. If they think about thinking, they're doing something weird and ridiculous and inefficient. It would be like if I called up a friend and said, I was thinking about walking. I probably can't do it, right? They'd be like, well, you walk? Come on, everyone can walk. So we just treat everyone as if thinking is something they should already be able to do. So there must be something kind of deeply wrong with them if they can't do it. And so we just assume that we know how to think because we're, people to say, think about it. So we're implied or hypnotized to believe that we already know how to do something, despite the fact that there was never really a time when we figured it out or were really taught, because other people don't know either. And then what we did is we stacked almost everything else in our life on top of our thinking, right? Because our ability to think about stuff, make decisions, decide how to feel or whatever, filter ideas, deciding what to focus on, what not to focus on. Pretty much everything else in our life is stacked on top of our thinking, and yet our thinking itself doesn't have a very good methodology. And so typically people will repeat stuff in their head and just sort of free associate. Like the mind will jump from one, when you think of one, it's like a train of thought, right? A train of thought is like one node to the next node, like one little cluster of neurons to the next, or one idea to an idea that reminds you of, and then that reminds you of the next thing, and that reminds you of the next thing. And that's pretty much what apparently is going on in people's heads. It's a little hard for me to remember, but I think that's what goes on. And then sometimes people will have this sort of sense of inspiration, but it's not necessarily correct when they have inspiration. They're like, oh, that's what that is, or oh, I feel certain about this, or God told me this, when maybe God does or doesn't speak to us, but people seem to jump to the conclusion that God is speaking pretty fast without really checking it over or having some way to verify that. So a lot of repetition and free association. And it tends to be based on words or kind of isolated images, kind of fairly static images. So instead, in order to think, what you want to do is the basis for your thinking should be scenarios. Now, a scenario is not just an image. It's kind of like a situation, right? Like when I've given you many examples of scenarios, and when I just naturally do it all the time when I'm talking to you. It's an illustration, maybe a scenario, but essentially it's both three-dimensional, and then you can look at it from different angles. You can zoom in on different things. Like when we had the scenario where you have the road in front of you, it's clear, and then there's the result. Then once I described that scenario, then we zoomed in on the idea of the result. First, for me, I just pictured the result as like a big orange ball at the end of the road. And then you kind of zoom in on it, which is kind of a little ridiculous, right? But I didn't say that out loud. But then you zoom in on it and you say maybe the result is a pile of money. And now you see that, right? You're zooming in and you're, instead of it just being, when I say a big orange ball, it's like a placeholder for a result. It's like a kind of a vague, formless mass with a label result, and then we can zoom into it. So with scenarios, you can zoom in, you look at different angles, you can move them forward in time, you can add a new element into the scenario, where you can change it. You can change the clear road into a road that forks or into a bunch of tunnels. You can make the road shorter or longer. You can go backwards in time and see what you're assuming is the case. And you can look around in like space, right? Without going forward or backward in time, you can look around in that one picture and see what's nearby and so forth. So you can do all those things with scenarios. And then the way that you help organize scenarios, organize but particularly express relationships within a scenario and then between scenarios. So you can compare scenarios. You can say in one situation you are you're stacking your actions or ideas on solid consolidated previous results, or in another situation you're not, right? And so or we can say, let's imagine how the next week is going to look like if you get started this week with building a website, or if you don't, right? And you can look at the difference between those two scenarios and play them both out and see which one you prefer. So you use words, because without words you can't really. They kind of provide a reflection, a way of. So it's not just organizing, but in order to process ideas, you need to like have a reflection. You need to have basically words and scenarios to make it the bottom line without getting too deep. So do both. And then optionally, you can do something like write down on a piece of paper. And this isn't always going to be reasonable or feasible or even sensible. Like it's not even going to be most effective or time efficient, but plenty of times it will be. And so you still, what matters is you base your thinking in scenarios, and just the more you first work on this to have a breakthrough with this and then consolidate it and integrate it, I'm telling you, this is radically important for your life. All right, this does capture how to think, and it's not what people do. And you don't need to, you can pretty much just have no repetitive thoughts. Once you start to think in terms of scenarios, you can get rid of your negative thoughts. You can be aware. It just looks weird when, from what I understand, people, the way their mind is, there's like a lot of repetitive like thoughts and images and words, and then the negative self-talk is apparently a fairly large part of it. But when you start to intentionally think in terms of scenarios, and that's what you're doing, is you're working on the next breakthrough in your life, or you're just in flow working on what you're working on. But if you're just kind of walking down the street and your thoughts are going, then you want to be thinking through like kind of your next breakthrough with scenarios, or at least some kind of issue or problem or opportunity that you're trying to take more advantage of, or resistance that you're trying to get rid of on the way to that opportunity, and so forth. So you can be intentional about scenarios. Now, and as you do that, you're automatically going to be asking positive questions and acknowledging reality, which is how I tell people to be. You want to ask positive questions and you want to acknowledge reality. I've talked about that other places, including, I don't know if there's any places actually in Project Juggernaut or Project X where that currently I talk about that much, but you can explore that too. You don't, positive affirmations is just repetitive type of thinking, and it tends to carry the implication that you don't, it tends to backfire a bit. So you don't need to make positive statements. What you want to do is work on breakthroughs, and do that by acknowledging reality and also asking positive questions about how you get through where you're trying to get to. And then the repetitive chatter, and also just the method of just free associating is silly. Why do I want to jump randomly from one mental picture to another, right? I want to develop scenarios in a sensible way that's getting me where I want to get to. If there's like a pile of gold inside of a fortress, then obviously I want to keep on poking around for a weak spot in the fortress, accumulate knowledge of about the fortress or about weapons or explosives to break through, and or their defenses or whatever, and then I want to build some kind of explosive or vehicle or battering ram or a whole plan. It might involve organizing my army and having them train, whatever it is, a vehicle to get in there. And of course, I'm constantly diverting resources to do all that. So if there's a pile of gold in there, then that's what I want to be doing. I want to be doing that breakthrough method. I don't want to just be like popping from one. I don't want to be like, oh, there's a fortress. Oh, there's a plant. Oh, what am I going to do tomorrow? Oh, did I do enough stuff today? Oh, there's an attractive woman. Oh, just like, how's my health doing? And just like random stuff. If there's a pile of gold in a fortress, you just want to get in there, right? You don't like, so you'll perhaps get to a point where when your brain starts to free associate, it just looks weird. It just looks kind of silly, right? Because there's no point to it. It's just aimless. Right, there's a pile of gold in a fortress, and just distracted by every little thing, and then that leads to the next random thought, and that leads to the next random thought, and you never come anywhere near breaking into the fortress, and it just makes no sense. And I just once again painted two different scenarios for you, right? I painted a scenario of thinking in terms of scenarios and breakthroughs, and then I painted a scenario of repetition and free association. So always thinking in terms of scenarios. And then you use words to express those relationships. If you don't use words, let's say you picture your hometown, let's say you live in America somewhere, and if you're trying to get to Paris, France, in terms of picturing a scenario, then unless you can use words to just say, okay, now I'm going to picture Paris, France. If you don't use words at all, this is a little odd. You're not going to really have problems using words, but just to point this out quickly, if you didn't use words, you pretty much just have to travel spatially like kind of across the ocean, but you just kind of have to make the trip without words over to Paris. And that's it. Like, it's thinking without words doesn't really make sense. It's not smart. There's not you're not expressing relationships well. You're limiting a very major aspect of thought that doesn't have a substitute. So scenarios and words, and then you can use writing. And I like to physically write in a physical notebook with an actual pen rather than on a computer. But if you have a strong preference for a computer, then that's fine. But I tend to think that a paper and pen has benefits. Kinesthetic means like physical feeling and muscle feelings and muscle actions and so forth. And let's say you're taking a shower or whatever. That's the bathroom is often the place of most inspirations happen, because it's where we're kind of more relaxed and not as distracted as other places. But however it happens, if you have a feeling of inspiration, like, oh, this is the answer, then don't just feel like you're done. Check, all right? So you check it by running it through with a scenario and looking at the scenario from multiple angles and trying it in different situations, whatever the inspiration is. Make sure it's going to work in all those situations, and then that helps to also integrate your inspiration. If your inspiration is a true breakthrough, then you want to make sure to integrate it and not just you think of it, you had the breakthrough, and then you lose the territory because you didn't fortify it and make sure that you hold it. You can just literally forget it later, or you can allegedly know it, but then constantly just be violating it because it's not integrated throughout the rest of your brain. And so in different scenarios where it would apply, you forget to apply that inspiration. All right, so that's how we think. In a nutshell, you didn't know I would teach you how to think in a few minutes. All right, it might be that I've mostly covered a lot of this already. How to set breakthrough goals in your mind most effectively, you do that with scenarios. And when you picture the result that you want, make sure you include not having resistance or blurriness when you get the result. So if you imagine making $10,000 a month, then remember, if you're doing that, you're thinking. And so you want to use scenarios and you want to use words. But you want to also imagine you're making $10,000 a month in a way that there's not resistance and that you understand how you're doing it so you can build on it. So you're essentially setting goals where you're not going to be able to fool yourself. And the way that you fool yourself, or that your brain kind of skips over things, or your brain fools itself or whatever, or one part of your brain fools another part of your brain, the way that works is by having something vague and deciding that it's not vague, that it's by having something that's not solid, like a floor that's going to break, but just deciding that it isn't going to break, that it's fine. So the point is, don't do that. Normally people set goals so that, like, their goal is to like get to the third floor, and so they, or to build a building 3 stories high, and so they build the first floor, and it's pretty wobbly and not very stable, and they're like, all right, well, that's good enough. And then they build the second floor on top of that. It gets even more wobbly, then build the third floor, and if it holds for for a few minutes, then they're like, great, got it, and they feel like they got it, and then they don't want to look at that building again, and they don't want feedback, and they don't want to test anything. They don't want to stand on the floor or put any furniture in there because they're scared it'll break. How does this happen in real life? Is we will, maybe it can look like you're learning, but you're not taking action, like we talked about. If that's the case, that part of that is because you think that you have a goal for the result of understanding stuff, but you're kind of scared that you don't understand. You don't want to test it. If you really were understanding clearly, you wouldn't be afraid to test it by actually taking action. One of the things that's going to inhibit you taking action is if you're afraid to test something. Same thing if you want the result of a woman or a man liking you romantically, then if that's blurry, if the goal is not set right, then if you don't set it where you really genuinely want them to like you and you don't want there to be resistance, and you want to be certain and clear that they know you. So the way to set breakthrough goals in your mind most effectively is set it not just for the result, but to have the result be clear and solid and real. Include those concepts with your goals all the time. And you do that through, again, picturing. Whenever you're thinking, you want to do it in terms of scenarios, not just words, not just a static image, not a repetitive thought, not just an affirmation. You can't write down your goals. You can supplement your goal setting by writing down the words, but you can't write down your goals in the sense of, same thing, you can't write down your thoughts. You can write down to support your thoughts, but your thoughts are based in scenarios and words if you're doing it properly. You can't write down a scenario. You can write down about a scenario, but you can't write down a scenario. A scenario is in your mind, basically. And words are words in your mind regardless of if they're written down, but you can support your goal setting by writing, but you can't write down the goal itself. The goal itself is actually set within your brain, and you make sure it's set by having the proper scenario and words. You think about it properly in order to set it. And again, make just absolutely certain to include that if you want like a woman or man to like you romantically, that they really like you, that you're clear about it, that you don't mind not testing it unnaturally, but you don't mind acting on it. That's a better way to put it. You're not really testing it. If you understand what you're learning in OMG machines, you don't need to just test it by making a website. You can act on it by making a website. If you have built a building properly, then you don't need to test it, but you can act on it by putting the furniture in there and having people move in, right? Or if it's a relationship, then you can just act as if they really do like you and not be so scared of them, or scared that if you don't give them lots of stuff or pay lots of money to them in various ways, if you're a guy, or if you're a girl, there's things that are more common for girls. It may be money, but it may be other things that you feel like you have to do, or else they won't like you. And that means you're not afraid to like lean on the structure. You're not afraid to stand on the floor because you're afraid it's too wobbly. So that means your goal is not set right. If you're satisfied with a wobbly floor, you didn't set your goal properly in the first place. That'll be another huge improvement in your life if you stop setting goals where you can fulfill it by fooling yourself, right? And it's weirdly easy to do. You just get the reality and non-wobbliness and reality. What am I trying to say here? Where you're not afraid to act on the information and so forth. And if you're afraid to act on the information or otherwise get feedback about the result that you supposedly got, or if you have a goal like to be intelligent, a lot of people have that goal. They want to be intelligent. They want to already be right. Well, that's great. So first of all, you set a goal for the past. So you can fully and completely stop setting goals for the past or the present, because the present is already like kind of past by the time you reflect on it for a second. So people have a goal to be intelligent, but they're often scared to get feedback about whether they really are intelligent, right? So that means that's a good indication that it's built on a shaky foundation, which means the goal isn't set properly in the first place. You want to have a goal to really be intelligent or wise in a way that you can act on and that you're clear on, where you understand what it is, why it is, and properly. All right, this next thing here I pretty much already talked about. Obviously, like if you're on the factory floor and you're trying to increase output of widgets, then you want to focus on bottlenecks. Also, if you're, let's say you're trying to make an argument with someone or persuade them, or you're writing a sales letter, or if you're trying to rank a website, right? Instead of focusing particularly on that you want the website to move up or rank a certain place, look for literal weak links or screw ups in your SEO. Look for bottlenecks or places where you don't really understand what's happening very well with your search engine optimization activities. If you're focused on your output, like your number of widgets you're making, and you're just trying to directly make that larger, then you're doing something I call chunking up, where you're basically going up one level of generalization, where you're seeing the issue less clearly rather than more clearly. When you start looking for bottlenecks and weak links and like wobbly or floors that could break, like things that foundations or things that you're building on that are poor, such as with search engine optimization, if one of the things you're doing you don't really understand very well, that's an example of a poorly supported floor. Then you take a look into that, and then you're chunking down, where you're actually looking at the ingredients and you're looking to make distinctions. And so more distinctions tends to be better, and losing resolution or losing or increasing kind of blurriness tends to be worse. And you might say, well, what about the view from 20,000 feet and so forth? That's not chunking up. That's just looking at things from a different perspective. right? If you're saying that you want to increase your widget output from 100 a day to 120 a day, that's not the view from 20,000 feet. That's just kind of a blurry goal that doesn't really give you much clarity. All right, this next line here, how standards, norms, and a desire for progress can interfere. Now, I talked about norms and standards in the previous video, but also this can affect your motivation. I also indicated this earlier. But if you're currently, your brain tends to be, unless you've been working on it, tends to be organized again around being a little bit above or a little bit below or about equal to various standards and norms in your life. Not just one, but there's a zillion standards and norms for every different little topic and situation in life. This can mess around with your achievement in all kinds of ways. First of all, if you start achieving more than how much you have set for a standard and norm, then your motivation can go away. Other times you're just trying to achieve a result because it's someone else's standard or norm or got programmed in your head, but it's disconnected from everything else. There's really no other reason for it. There's no way it's going to make your life better. You're just doing it because you think you're supposed to. Right? And so there's no integration there. Okay, how about a desire for progress? This is a little bit profound. Suppose that you have this fortress you're trying to break into with your army, and it turns out that the tool or the ingredient for an explosive or whatever that you need to break through the fortress is 1,000 miles away. And let's say you're breaking through the fortress because you're trying to get to an oasis, it's 5 miles away, but you have to go through the fortress to get there, right? It can feel like you're going the opposite direction if you go 1,000 miles to get the right ingredient to break through the fortress. But this is why you don't want to think in terms of distance anymore, because it'll lead you to the wrong conclusion. If you've poked around and organized your knowledge and you've come to the conclusion that, like, you might spend a reasonable amount of resources and time seeing if there's a better way than going 1,000 miles, right, to get the ingredient. But at the point where you come to but there isn't any problem if the closest ingredient and the most feasible way to break into the fortress is by getting this ingredient that's 1,000 miles away, then that's exactly a straight line in another way of thinking toward your goal, right? Like, it's exactly on the correct path to getting to where you have to go. Just like if you have to drive the opposite, if you're in New York and you have to drive the opposite direction, if you're trying to go to California, but you go to the airport first, right? And if the airport's in the opposite direction of California, you still obviously drive to the airport. You don't get worried that you're driving half an hour in the wrong direction, right? The wrong direction from California. You're going in the right direction to the airport. So when you're so it's obvious when it comes to the plane flights, right? Although these days it might be easier and faster to drive, but regardless, if you're focused on breakthroughs and with the flying on an airplane to get somewhere, it's pretty obvious and easy to see that in terms of a breakthrough, right? It's pretty easy and clear to see that flying is typically much more efficient if it's a long distance. So it's easy to naturally think that way. But in a lot of other cases in life, intuitively, your brain, especially if you're not paying attention, if it's kind of happening mostly kind of sub or semi-consciously, beneath the level where you're really particularly analyzing things carefully, then you can have this intuitive feeling like you're going in the wrong direction when in fact you're going straight toward in the correctly, such as going 1,000 miles quote unquote out of your way, but you're not going out of your way, right? You're going directly toward the ingredient you need. Then you come directly back and you blow up the fortress and you're all set, or you blow a hole in it and so forth. Similarly, people feel like, oh, gee, if I spend time figuring out how to think and how whether God exists and all that stuff, then is that really going to give me progress in life? Well, yeah, it's directly going to get you right where you want to get fastest, but it can feel like you're going backwards, and that fools a lot of people. Another thing that comes to mind regarding this is, suppose you want to know that God exists, or you want to know that Jesus was God, right? Or God's son, or however you represent it, which I believe, by the way. Then, but in order to get there, you need to be able to let go for a time of feeling certain of that, or feeling certain that God exists, or that it's reason. I can't absolutely show you. I can't know for certain that Jesus was God, or was God's avatar, or God's son, whatever. A person, that again, there's no. I'm not saying anything strange if it seems like I am. I'm just giving kind of the typical understanding of Jesus, but. So I can't prove that perfectly, but it can be. Sometimes in life you can know because of stipulation and so forth, which I can't really quite get into now. But you can know that something is the most reasonable course of action. So, given the way that we live our life and things that we act on normally and things we take for granted, then it kind of violates that. We'd have to violate things like that. We'd have to be skeptical in ways that we're typically not skeptical in life, to reject, and as far as I can tell with Jesus. But with God, interestingly enough, and the basic nature of God, we can know absolutely, clearly, perfectly for certain that God exists. But in order to get there, what a lot of people think, like they'll already believe in God, and so to them it'll feel like pretty irrelevant to know for certain that God exists, right? And it'll feel like, well, what's the point? I'll just end up back where I started, which is feeling certain that God exists. But it's very different to know than to just feel like you're certain. But to get there, where you feel, where to get to clear, correct certainty, then you actually need to genuinely open up the question for yourself about whether God exists. And that can feel scary for people because they have this hardened feeling of certainty that is really uncertainty, and they're scared to mess with it, right? They're scared to act on it. They're scared to build on it or to put a foot on it like it's going to be solid. So they're actually, once again, showing that they're afraid that God might not exist, even though they claim to be certain. And so they don't want to open up the question. But you have to open up the question in order to get to certain knowledge. You can't really get to knowledge of anything in a clear way unless you're willing to genuinely confront the fact that it might turn out to be the opposite. It might be true. So in all these ways, this desire for progress in the wrong way, this kind of mistaken represent. So the solution is to represent things properly and understand properly, which this breakthrough stacking will help us do. Then we can measure progress properly. So I could have said measuring progress incorrectly or misrepresenting what constitutes progress can interfere. All right, and this kind of summarizes here, and I've already indicated how you can feel calm, confident, and not worried, because you're going to be able to deal with any situation in life, because every situation in life, either you have no control over it, so there's nothing you could have done, in which case you might as well be calm and not worried in the first place, or there's something you can do, and if there's something you can do, then you're doing the maximum amount of what you can do if you properly apply this breakthrough stacking, the methodology. And the more you understand, the more you do this and the more you apply this to important ideas in life, then the more of a foundation you have, the more resource you have to bring to bear in the future. But right now, you have the resource you have right now. You have the ideas, the clarity, the understanding you have right now. You don't have anything else. It's beyond your control to have twice as much as what you have right now. And it's beyond your control right now to have what you might have in 10 years. In 10 years, you might have a lot more understanding, a lot more resources, but you don't have that now. So now you can calmly and confidently and without worry just apply this methodology and apply it to the most important things in your life first. And you don't need to worry because you're doing the exact right thing, and you can get more and more used to being in flow with the methodology itself. So you're either breaking through in flow or you're then operating in flow after that. Completely stop expecting or accepting effort. You don't want to value effort. Effort is just working against friction. It's just related to internal conflict or external conflict. So forget about effort and struggle as something that you want or as evidence that you're doing well, all right? Or as something that should be there. You don't need to feel bad about effort and struggle. Of course you have effort and struggle now before you integrate this, before you fully get this. So there's nothing wrong now, right now. With however things are right now, it's not wrong. It just is, right? So there's nothing, you never need to feel bad about how things are. And you don't need to feel bad about how things should be because you have no idea how they're going to be. So you don't need to feel bad about the future. You don't know what's going to be. You don't need to feel bad about how things are now, because they just are that way. What you want to do is calmly, confidently apply the breakthrough method to whatever seems most important. And maybe one of the first things you want to apply it to, first, make sure you can feed yourself. And then after that, try to understand about importance, try to understand about understanding, try to understand about the most important question in life is, how do we know what's true? How do we distinguish what's true from what's false, from what we don't know, that sort of thing. That's ultimately what the law of implication is based on. It's all about. That's why I say that you get the results you really want in life, you get the results you want by focusing on what's true rather than using default thinking, letting just default thinking run on its own. You'll use default thinking, but you work with it, and you surgically kind of interfere with it to keep it on track, just like you might steer a car. You don't steer a car by turning it off, right, and pushing it. It drives, it has its default, but then you steer it. And be wary, because plenty of leaders and teachers and gurus and even religious leaders, right, and so forth, they basically profit either monetarily or just like their kind of ego, and they get to kind of keep doing their job and they keep being valued more by having a struggle, right? We see this, I'm recording this the day after the Ferguson ruling and all the riots there, but plenty of leaders have profited for years and decades from division and setting one race against the other and so forth in America. And then that's part of the problem. There's other parts of the problem too, of course. I'm not a big fan of the police or anything like that either. So I'm not siding with one side or the other or what. But when you have, but in terms of the violence too, it's one thing if there's violence toward tyrants or bullies, but there's in Ferguson, near St. Louis in Missouri, they're looting like mom and pop stores and stuff like that, so just businesses that have nothing to do with any of the problem. So these leaders who benefit from the struggle benefit from eternally race tension or eternally you feeling guilty and struggling with yourself. A lot of Christian teachers will tell you that it's all about the struggle and you're supposed to feel that struggle, and guilt. And then they keep their job and they keep their importance, right? What I'd like to do is become unimportant to you. I'd like you to break through and understand everything that I have to show you so you don't need me anymore. I don't want you to keep struggling and feeling confused and like you need me. Okay, I want you to not need me. And I try to structure even the financial compensation and the way people buy products from OMG machines so that we don't profit from people continuing to struggle and going from one product to the next and never making money. We actually profit much more from people making money, and then they support other people, or they'll use that exact money to come to our live event or do something that we might offer in the future. But we have hundreds of people making actual money, and a lot of it, and they're very happy and willing to then use that on future products as long as they're worth it and good that we can give them. So again, I build it into the model in the first place that I'm not profiting from something that is detrimental to people, whereas that's often not built into business models. All right, we got through it all. I will wrap up this particular series here, and I hope you enjoyed it.